Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Today we're tackling something that is honestly just truly fascinating. We're demystifying the whole idea of ultimate memory mastery. Specifically, we're looking at the subcontinental system of hifths. Now, strictly speaking, hifths is the practice of committing the entire Qur'an to memory. We're talking about a massive text of over 6,000 verses. But here's the real secret. The techniques developed to pull off this monumental task, they hold absolute gold for literally any focused learner who wants to push their brain's retention to the absolute limit. So we're going to decode the exact system that makes this whole thing possible. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the overarching hifth game plan. Then we'll break down the big three: Sabaq, Sabqi, and Dhor. After that, we'll map out the actual daily hifth routine, zoom in on the micromechanics of memorization, and finally, wrap things up with some battle-tested pro tips for faster hifth. Let's get into it. All right, Section 1, the hifth's game plan. This is our macro strategy. Okay, before we get totally lost in the daily grind, we really need a bird's eye view of this journey. Look, if you start a massive memorization project at page 1, you're just going to hit a wall. You absolutely need a strategic route. And the specific routing strategy recommended here is actually super clever. The text is divided into 30 chapters, which are called juz. But you don't start at chapter 1. Actually, you start at the 30th, the very end of the book. Then you move to the 29th. Why do it backwards like that? Well, the chapters at the end have much shorter verses. It builds this really quick, highly rewarding momentum, so by the time you jump back up to the first juz to tackle the main bulk of the text sequentially, your memorization engine is already warmed up and running hot. Moving on to Section 2. This is the core engine: Sabaq, Sabqi, and Dhor. Listen, if you take away literally anything from this explainer today, let it be this. These next 3 terms will absolutely make or break your entire memorization endeavor. First up is Sabaq. Think of this as the front line. This is the brand new material that you're committing to memory today. Depending on your level, it might be a few lines, maybe half a page, or even a full page. It's raw, it's fresh, and it requires maximum intense focus to get it into your brain so you can recite it perfectly to your teacher. Next, we have Sabqi. You can think of Sabqi as your crucial safety net. See, once you've memorized your fresh Sabaq, it's actually incredibly fragile. It wants to slip away. So Sabqi is the daily revision of your most recently learned material. We're talking typically the last 3 new pieces you learned, plus a cycle of the pages from the exact chapter you're currently working through. It basically catches the new information before it evaporates. And finally, there's Dhor. If Sabaq is like building a house, then Dhor is the essential maintenance work. This is your long-term revision. Every single day, you are cycling through half a chapter to a full chapter of everything you've historically memorized. And I mean everything. Without Dhor, years of hard work would literally just disappear from your brain. You gotta keep the paint fresh, right? This really perfectly illustrates the psychological reality of the whole process. Sabaq feels incredibly hard. And it should, because it's heavy cognitive lifting. You're actively forging brand new neural pathways, basically dragging information from short-term into long-term memory. Dhor, on the other hand, is a lot more fluid. You're just refreshing data that's already securely locked in the vault. All right, Section 3, the daily hifth routine. This is exactly how we train the muscle. So what does this actually look like on, say, a random Tuesday? Memory is essentially a muscle. And to build it, you need a highly structured training schedule. You're looking at a commitment of about 4 hours every day. In the morning, you spend 45 minutes of pure, unbroken focus solely on your Sabaq. That's the new material. Your brain is fresh, which is absolutely perfect for that heavy cognitive lifting we just talked about. Then, later in the evening, you sit down for a 3-hour marathon. This is where you recite the morning Sabaq to your teacher, and then dive deep into your Sabqi and Dhor, cycling through all the recent and historical material. Now we face a very, very intimidating number: 2. When you recite that morning Sabaq to your teacher in the evening, 2 is the absolute maximum number of mistakes allowed, no exceptions. If you make 3 mistakes, well, the material isn't truly memorized, and you get sent right back to do it again until it's flawless. This standard of absolute, uncompromising precision is literally what makes the entire system work. But it's not just a daily treadmill. There are these massive milestones built in. Every time you finish a chapter, you have to revise and recite the entire thing in one single sitting. Furthermore, every 5 chapters, you just hit the brakes. You completely stop all new memorization for a few weeks to focus entirely on Dajjar, just tightening up everything you've learned so far. Our source notes that the optimal timeline for this whole journey is actually 3 to 4 years of intense, fast-paced effort. It turns out, training this memory muscle harder and faster while you're young actually results in stronger overall retention than if you just dragged it out over 7 or 8 years. Moving into Section 4, the micromechanics of memorization. Let's see how a single verse gets locked in. Okay, so we've looked at the macro, now let's zoom all the way down to the micromechanics of memorizing just a single verse. Step 1 is absolutely critical. You have to nail the exact pronunciation on the very first try. Why? Well, because whatever you imprint first is what's going to stick, whether it's right or wrong. Then you don't just swallow the whole sentence. You break it into these tiny 1 or 2 word chunks. You repeat a chunk up to 10 times, bolt the next chunk onto it, repeat that, and finally look away and test yourself completely blind. What's really fascinating here is how the micro perfectly reflects the macro blueprint. When you memorize a single verse, that tiny 1-word chunk is essentially a mini Sabaq. You push it into your super short-term memory, and by linking it to the previous words, you're basically performing a micro Sabqi, connecting the brand new stuff directly to the established stuff. It's literally the exact same engine, just scaled way down. And finally, Section 5, Pro Tips for Faster Hifdh. These are the battle-tested strategies. So the source material for this explainer draws on a massive 7-year journey with 8 different teachers. And through all that trial and error, a few battle-tested tips emerged. Like this specific target, 6 minutes. A master of this system can commit an entire new page to memory in about 6 minutes. Honestly, it's wild. Our source highly recommends timing yourself. Literally put a stopwatch on your desk. Doing this gamifies the task and forces absolute, full-tilt focus. Because when you're racing the clock, you just don't have time to get distracted. Next, you really have to build sensory anchors. Remember, reciting from memory is essentially live problem solving. Your brain is constantly searching for what comes next, so you gotta give it clues. Listen to a master reciter first to lock in the sound. Build a mental map, like know exactly if a verse starts on the top left or the bottom right of the physical page. Use a melodious voice when you learn, because those up and down vocal inflections act as auditory hooks that literally pull the next word into your mind. Oh, and always have recitations playing passively in the background throughout your day. You also need analytical tools for this. Read the translation first. Understanding the story gives you this logical momentum. Next, watch out for repeating verses. The text has tons of similar phrases, so don't just try to brute force them. Actively map out the specific differences and exactly where they live on the page so you don't get devastatingly mixed up later. Oh, and here's a kind of cheeky tip from the source. Learn to read your teacher's body language. Trust me, a sharp inhale or a sudden shift in their seat almost always means you're about to say the wrong word. But as we wrap up, we really need to look at this very sobering quote. The vast majority, unless they have a teacher, they will just end up giving up if they try and do it on their own. Think about that. All these tactics, all these strategies we just talked about, they're virtually useless without the external pressure of a mentor. You desperately need someone committed for the long haul to enforce that maximum 2 mistakes rule we talked about earlier. So I want to leave you with this final critical thought. Who will hold you accountable on your memorization journey? Look, whether you're using this system for Hifdh or you're adapting Sabaq, Sabqi, and Dhor to study for a massive medical exam, the blueprint is right here. You just have to build the engine. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks a brand new approach to how you learn. Catch you next time.